This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter, more dangerous. A shift that only becomes visible when institutions start pushing back at the same time. For a long time, power here has moved without friction. Orders issued, threats floated, emergency declared. And everyone adjusted until they didn't. What you're watching right now is not rebellion. It's resistance showing up late, but all at once. Votes instead of statements. Lines instead of loyalty. Because once the word emergency becomes routine, the rules don't disappear loudly. They thin. They stretch. They stop holding. And here's the uncomfortable part. This isn't happening because something went wrong. It's happening because the system did exactly what it was allowed to do. If you want to understand how power actually slips its limits, not in theory, but in real time, stay with me. Because what happens next doesn't reverse. It only accelerates. What actually controls the system right now is not ideology, not elections, not even popularity. It's velocity. Power moves fastest where resistance is slow. And over time, speed becomes authority. When decisions are framed as urgent, debate looks irresponsible. When everything is an emergency, oversight feels optional. And when consequences are delayed, control quietly shifts. This is how systems change without announcing themselves. Not through coups, through convenience. The mechanism is simple. Centralized decisions, compress timelines, overwhelm attention. The public sees noise. Institutions feel pressure, and limits meant to slow power are treated as obstacles to efficiency. That's the reframe you need. This isn't about personalities testing boundaries. It's about a structure that rewards whoever moves fastest and punishes whoever asks for permission. Once that balance tips, loyalty becomes currency, and law becomes negotiable. And here's the part that matters. When the system starts correcting itself, it does so abruptly, never smoothly. That's where we are now. And the shift didn't start today. There was a time when extraordinary power looked extraordinary, rare, heavy, expensive to use. Before, threats carried cost. Declarations required justification, and institutions moved slowly on purpose. Now, compare that to now. Power no longer waits. It announces, it dares response. What changed wasn't a law. It was a habit. The slow shift was normalization. Each exception explained as temporary. Each shortcut framed as necessary. Each escalation justified by the last one. And because nothing collapsed immediately, the system adapted. Agencies learned to move faster. Legislators learned to react later. Oversight learned to chase instead of lead. This is the most dangerous kind of change, the kind that feels administrative, procedural, boring, until one day, multiple institutions hit the same boundary at once and realize the boundary is thinner than they remember. That's when alarms start sounding. Not publicly, internally, because slow change doesn't feel like danger until it's irreversible. And the first visible crack is never the biggest one. Then the system jolts, not with collapse, with a vote, a procedural move, quiet on the surface, explosive underneath. Lawmakers step in to limit something that was never supposed to move freely in the first place. The power to act first and explain later. The power to treat force as leverage. The power to bypass consent because time is framed as scarce. This wasn't symbolic. It wasn't messaging. It was a mechanical intervention, because once force is discussed casually, the machinery doesn't wait for intent. Plans form. Allies listen. Adversaries prepare. And suddenly, what sounded abstract becomes operational. Here's the tell. The response wasn't argument. It was fury, pressure, personal. Immediate. That reaction is the signal. When restraint feels like sabotage, the system is already under strain. If you're trying to understand why this moment feels sharper than the others, stay with me. because this shock wasn't the story, it was the symptom. And what it triggered next is where the real risk lives. This is how the system actually works. Power doesn't expand in speeches, it expands in processes. When something is labeled urgent, authority consolidates automatically. Decisions narrow, gatekeepers disappear, and responsibility flows upward while consequences flow outward. The benefit concentrates, the damage disperses. Those with proximity to decision-making gain flexibility, access, protection. Everyone else absorbs volatility. Markets swing, allies hedge. Institutions scramble to interpret intent after action has already begun. This is the hidden mechanism. Emergency doesn't just justify action. It reorganizes who matters. Oversight becomes retroactive. Debate becomes obstruction. And loyalty becomes the shortest path through the system. What makes this dangerous isn't misuse once. It's repetition. Because each time the mechanism runs, it runs smoother, faster, with less resistance. And the system learns, not restraint. Efficiency, that's why interventions now feel abrupt. Why pushback feels late. And why even small corrections trigger outsized reactions. Once a system reorganizes around speed and obedience, reversing it doesn't look like reform. It looks like disruption, and that's where we're headed next. Now, everything speeds up, statements multiply, signals leak, pressure escalates. What used to take weeks now takes hours. What required consensus now requires silence. Institutions don't debate, they brace, because once authority is asserted loudly, backing down looks like weakness. And weakness invites challenge. So escalation becomes the safer option. This is the trap. Each move forces the next one to be sharper, more public, more absolute. There's no pause here, no cooling off period, only reaction layered on reaction. And while attention is pulled forward, something else happens quietly. Normal checks miss their window, deadlines slip, reviews stall. Not because of conspiracy, because speed starves process. By the time questions surface, the system has already moved on. That's how accountability dies. Not from attack, from exhaustion. If this feels chaotic, it's because chaos is functional. It keeps everything provisional, unfinished, unanswerable. And once a system learns it can outrun scrutiny, it rarely slows down voluntarily. The next phase isn't louder. It's closer. This is where it reaches you. Not in theory, in rhythm. You feel it when stability becomes conditional, when decisions that shape your future arrive without warning. When the rules seem to change, but no one votes on it, you're told nothing has happened yet. But planning becomes harder. Confidence thins. Promises about restraint collide with language that sounds like preparation. And even if nothing comes next, the cost has already landed. Because uncertainty taxes everyone. Quietly, your savings don't like volatility. Your job doesn't like disruption. Your life doesn't benefit from systems that move faster than accountability. And here's the part that rarely gets said. When power concentrates, your influence doesn't disappear dramatically. It fades. You notice it when debates stop shaping outcomes. When oversight happens after decisions are locked in, when participation feels symbolic. If you're still watching, it's because you sense that shift. Because this isn't about politics anymore. It's about whether you live inside a system that answers questions or one that outruns them. And once that line is crossed, walking it back is never simple. This doesn't stay contained. Systems like this never do. When one center of power starts moving unpredictably, everything connected to it recalibrates. Quietly, defensively, partners stop assuming continuity. They start planning for variance. Commitments become conditional. Coordination becomes cautious. Trust gets replaced with contingency. You don't see this on television. You see it in parallel planning, in backup channels, in decisions made just in case. And once that begins, the system is no longer local. It's networked. Every signal sent outward is read twice. Once for meaning, once for reliability. When authority appears personal instead of procedural, allies hedge. When oversight looks optional, assurances weaken. And when rules feel flexible, agreements feel temporary. The most destabilizing part isn't confrontation, it's doubt. Because doubt spreads faster than conflict. It doesn't announce itself. It just reroutes behavior. And when enough actors reroute at the same time, the system doesn't break. It drifts. And no one is fully sure where it's drifting to. From here, the system has three possible paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Institutions reassert friction. Processes slow power back down. Limits are enforced, not loudly, but consistently. This path doesn't restore the past. It stabilizes the future, quietly. The second is erosion. Nothing snaps. Nothing explodes. Authority keeps expanding at the margins. Oversight keeps arriving late. Exceptions keep becoming routine. Life continues. But under a thinner set of rules, the third path is rupture. This is where speed collides with reality, where assumptions fail all at once, where a decision made to project strength forces consequences no one planned for. Rupture isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like cascading miscalculation. Sometimes it looks like allies acting independently. Sometimes it looks like markets reacting before leaders can explain. None of these paths announce themselves ahead of time. You only recognize them in hindsight. And here's the tension. The same system behaviors can lead to any of the three. What decides the path isn't intention. It's restraint. And restraint is the one variable that's still unresolved. There's a temptation at moments like this to look for reassurance, for a signal that the system will correct itself automatically. It doesn't. Systems only hold when pressure is answered by structure, when limits are enforced before they're tested to failure, when speed is slowed deliberately, not accidentally. What you're watching now isn't resolution. It's exposure, a glimpse of how power behaves when it believes time is on its side, and how institutions respond when they realize it might not be. Nothing here ends cleanly. No matter which path emerges, something has already changed. Expectations, assumptions, trust. And once those shift, they don't snap back on command. So the question isn't whether this moment matters. It's whether it's noticed before it passes. If you want to keep understanding how these systems move, not after they break, but while they're still deciding what they are, stay with me. Because the next phase won't arrive as a headline. It will arrive as a precedent. And by the time it's obvious, it will already be normal.